Oh, sorry. I thought I'd start recording there before I forget.
Oh, okay.
so,
Okay.
so, so yeah, I came back to the States for a year. I'm from Atlanta, and then
Oh,
went back for
Atlanta.
another year.
Yeah.
Then got married. To one of my students who's actually a year older than me, but whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really something.
And then we tried
So,
living in the States for 2 years. Decided we actually like Japan better, and I have not left Japan since 2010.
wow, that's great. How has the COVID thing been over there?
Weird. It's never been like ever, super prolific. We're
Hmm.
in the midst of a spike now. It's a bigger deal in the big cities, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they haven't been sticking anyone with needles for the most part yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that is something. Yeah, it's been a year. Yeah, that's for sure. I got to say, um, I've never done quite so many video. I mean, you know, what's the word I'm looking for?
Podcast.
What? No, no, not podcast. I mean, virtual stuff.
Oh,
As I
right,
had
right,
this
right.
last year, I kind of miss talking in front of real people. To tell you the honest truth,
Yeah, I
but
do get the benefit.
that will come.
Yeah, I get the benefit of my job never stopped. There was about 2 weeks where we went, but we didn't have students, and then we
Uh-huh.
did Zoom classes for about 2 months, but
Yeah.
we were at our office doing them. And then after
Oh
that,
yeah.
that's last July. Everyone just started coming.
Wow.
My
Wow.
daughter started going back to her school, so I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they went pretty
How,
quickly.
how did you do with the language?
Yeah, my Japanese is still terrible.
Oh.
Interestingly, my reading is better than my like speaking and listening. Like I can usually look at something, not necessarily the kanji because that's
yeah.
the real detailed stuff, but the basic
Yeah.
symbols I can
Yeah.
read
Yeah.
without too much trouble. So
Oh,
sometimes
that's
I can
good.
read it perfectly, but I don't actually know what it's saying.
Yeah. oh man. Well,
But
this is going to be it's going to be fun. I got to say, both being Trekkies, I guess that probably adds a little extra to it.
yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and do a proper introduction.
Sure, sure.
I'll ask you just for a really short plot summary, and then I one of the fun things
Plot
about the
plot summary
the
of.
episode, just what happened in like 2 or 3 sentences.
Oh, okay, okay.
Not a full on one. I do
Yeah,
another podcast where we do full on ones, and this one
yeah.
I'm just
No,
like,
no, no.
give me the TV guide description is what I
Yeah, sure.
might
Yeah, I would
actually
like
say.
to. I'd like to stay away from going into the plot of the film too much. Well, I'll get into that when I talk about it. So yeah,
Yeah, TV guide version will be fine. So,
sure, sure.
um,
Okay, great.
okay, here I go then. So, welcome to Aural Hygiene. It's a podcast where we look at educational, experimental, caught films, interesting documentaries. Today, well, we're in a weird space today. My other podcast, we actually do sci-fi, and we're doing sci-fi today. We're doing some Trek. We're doing an episode of The Next Generation called "Who Watches the Watchers." But our intention is a little more oral hygiene. We're going to see where this takes us into things that reflect our civilization and so forth. So for that, today we have a guest. He's the author of several books, including Ancient Gods, the Quantum Akashic Field, Supernatural Gods, Lost Civilizations. Hello, Jim Willis.
Hello, Matt. Good to be with you. Good to be with you. You're coming to me from my future, I guess.
Yeah,
I'm on the other side of the world from you.
yeah. Actually, it's funny. We did a podcast about 2 weeks ago, and the guy was in Tasmania, and it was the
Wow.
first time we were in the past. So we're always in the future for
well, let
people.
me know if anything happens during the broadcast that I should know about.
Look at that. No, okay. But yeah, I came to you, and I actually did mention Star Trek. So it's my own fault that we're already in the sci-fi bubble here. But you specifically brought up this one, which interestingly, I thought I'd seen every TNG. I'm not sure I'd actually watched this one before.
Ah, yeah.
So
Well, yeah. Who watches the Watchers? It's a really interesting plot, I think, because it goes along with one of the uh, veins of evidence that I follow in ancient gods about who the ancient gods might have been. In this particular one, the crew of the Enterprise has to, it's the next generation, has to go down and rescue some people who were in what they call what is it, the bird nest of the bird,
The duck blind.
the duck blind, that's what it is. And because they're down there looking at ancient peoples and watching their development, and of course they get found out, and the ancient people discover that these people know so much more than they do, and they see them as gods, and it begins to spark a religion. And it just begs the question, is this something that has happened in our past as well? I think it was Arthur C. Clarke once said, any sufficiently advanced technology will appear to be magic. And it opens the whole idea. The ancient gods, who were they? One possibility is that perhaps they were beings that were just technologically superior. And these ancient Stone Age people in world history saw them as knowing so much more. And it could have very possibly sparked a religious experience. And over the years, uh, the idea grew about it, and the oral history got bigger and bigger, they began to look at these people not just as advanced beings, but as gods. And we find this concept repeated all around the world in the Mayan, the Popol Vuh, and the Mayan culture, and the Hopi culture, of course, in Sumeria, Babylon, Egypt, of course. So it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, and one thing that I always think about is just the idea in civilization now. We're so much smarter than they used to be. Where in this ancient culture, a few of them are quite sharp. I'm sitting here scanning for her name and I can't find it, but the lady at Picard eventually does bring to the ship. She's shocked. It takes her a while to get
Yes.
past it, but she's able to make the mental leap to understand what's
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
happening. Where
Yeah.
I'm sure there's even crew members, servants of the Enterprise who maybe would in the future or in this high technology situation would not be able to make that mental leap.
Well, yeah, and I wonder whether it's something that we've had to do in the past, our own civilization. The Mayans, for instance, have mythologies about people who could sit in one place and look at a device they held in their hand and see what's happening on the other side of the world. Now, the Mayans talked about that before the Spaniards came, and we have their written records about it and their oral history. In other words, they have a mythology about people who are doing the very same thing that you and I are doing right now, talking on opposite sides of the world. Where did that come from? Really interesting.
Well, I think even though I'm always reading 5 books at one time, so this is one of the recent ones. Just the idea, the quantum idea that future events actually also
Well,
influence the past events.
that's another possibility too. And this is an idea that's been around for a long time. The whole idea that of the omega point. In other words, we are not evolving from something, but we are evolving toward something. Something in the future is drawing us toward it. I'm amazed at the number of really bona fide scientists right now who are asking this same kind of questions. They're asking things like, do we live in a simulation, for instance? Is this a big computer program that's so advanced that we don't even realize we're just pixels on a screen? And yet, physics, the more that and biology, the more they take us apart and get down to anything, we're left not with organs of the body or cells or even atoms. We're left with something sounds suspiciously like pixels. Could that be? It's just all up in the air right now, and I'm frankly amazed that in the last 10 years, where this kind of thing used to be just scoffed at and met with just ridicule in even scientific conventions. I'm amazed at the number of really reputable scientists that I'm talking to now that have these same kinds of ideas.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the draws to Star Trek. That's where you become a Trekkie because it's like they're especially old school Trek. I guess newer Trek it's a little more dark, although it still has
Yeah,
the basic soul, I think. But the idea
yeah,
that we're moving towards something
yeah,
better,
yeah.
because Star Trek starts like Mission Impossible is, our hero made a horrible mistake and now needs to spend the rest of the movie fixing it, or
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
basic plot. Whereas Trek is like, hey, we're good and we're exploring and we're finding a conflict there, and we're trying to make that conflict into something better,
yeah,
alchemize it, so to
yeah.
speak.
Yeah, I like Gene Roddenberry's hopefulness. I really do. When he had the whole idea that somehow there was something better out ahead of us, and that keeps coming back over and over again. I really like that. I think it's a wonderful, positive way to go about life. But in ancient civilizations, we have to ask the questions: um, are we the ones that are looking back now at ancient civilizations, and are we the ones suffering from amnesia? And that's frankly the one problem I have when I talk to people and study about mythology, is that people get so lost in the mythology, the details of the mythology, that they miss the overriding message of the myth. Same thing with movies. People start talking about Star Trek movies, and people who aren't quite into it as much as I am, but they like to get so involved in, oh, why did this happen? Why did that happen? And they miss the central premise of what the whole thing is about. The details can really bog us down, and if we miss those details, we're in trouble. Take a classic example. Take the flood myths that are all over the world. Everybody gets, from Noah's flood to the Babylonian ideas, and to the Hopi myths, and the myths of just about everywhere you go. There's flood mythology, and so people start talking about the details of the mythology. Where did the water come from? How could the boat fit that many animals? What about this? What about that? And in doing that, they miss what the flood stories are about. And because the details seem so fantastic, they dismiss them out of hand. And in doing that, we run into some real troubles. Just give you an idea. People talk about it, the Atlantis myth all the time, the Atlantis tradition. When Plato talked about it in the Timaeus, people wonder, well, where was Atlantis? How could it have disappeared? How could the people have had a civilization like that? And we don't know anything about it. But they miss the overriding thing. Plato said for many generations, the people there obeyed the laws and loved the divine to which they were kin. They reckoned that qualities of character were far more important than their present prosperity. So they bore the burden of their wealth and possessions lightly, and did not let their high standard of living intoxicate them or make them lose their self control. But when the divine element in them became weakened and their human traits became predominant, they ceased to be able to carry their prosperity with moderation. Man, if anything describes the modern world, isn't that it? And if we spend all of our time trying to figure out where Atlantis was and when it was, and all, which is all fun, but if we miss the most important part of it, we're missing the fact that Plato wasn't just talking to his own generation. He was talking to us. These are situations that we really have to hear. So that's why I love to study these lost generations, these lost civilizations. I really do.
I guess it's, they say we still can't explain how a bumblebee flies, but that doesn't mean it can't sting you.
They still do. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. It really is.
It's been a while since I was stung. The last time was about 8 years ago, getting into the back seat of the car because I didn't have my Japanese license yet, leaning back and right in the back.
Oh, for me it was 2 days ago, so I'm very familiar with it.
Just I'm looking over my notes here. One interesting thing is they kind of reused with some notable changes, which I'd also like to consider. They use the same setup from the show again in the movie Insurrection. Sort of like there's an
Hmm.
anthropological group of people looking at a pre-warp society, and something horrible happens, and they figure out
Yeah.
they're there. In the case of Insurrection, of course, it's very different though, because this is a group of very highly technological people that have decided to go back
That's right. They
and
chose. They chose. And that's not that crazy an idea. We have evidence of American Indian, Western American Indian tribes that actually experimented with agriculture and lived with it for a while and didn't like it, and they chose to go back to the old hunter-gatherer, following the herds kind of thing. It's a decision you can make. Quite frankly, I think it's a decision that we as a human race are going to have to make pretty quick, because if we don't, we're really in trouble. We're playing with toys that we just can't handle, and I'm frankly worried. I think we need to hear some of these stories, and we need to think about the message, because it's practical. It's not just entertainment anymore. It's really practical.
I think we're both people who have somewhat detached. Well, you're living in some very nice
Yeah,
wooded area, of course.
yeah.
For me, I do. Well, I have a 12 to 9. It's not a 9 to 5. That's why I can do these podcasts in the morning and then go
Uh-huh.
to
Yeah.
work. And I intentionally do things slowly. I'm going to leave about an hour and a half too early. I'm going to walk about 5 kilometers to the train station, even though there's a
Wow.
train station almost right outside my door. But I mean,
Hmm.
that's why I listen to podcasts too. So,
Yeah.
but going through
Yeah.
rice fields, I
Sure.
do the same thing at night. I do now know where the stars are at certain points a year because I'm always walking through the same rice fields. The family house
Yeah.
is in the mountains, and I'm like, well, if civilization, explodes, hey, maybe we can go to the family house that's in the mountains.
Yeah.
Very nice,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
old tatami rooms, all that.
It could very well be that an ancient Japanese culture can lead us back to that too. Have you studied much about the Yoman culture in Japan? Do they teach much of it over there?
Yeah, yeah, you can go in. You'll see museums based on that. I remember the first town I worked in had a real nice Jomon museum and this massive stone quarry, which that
Is
was
it?
more modern use. But
Yeah. Is it pronounced Joman? I've been saying Yoman, but I didn't. But it's Joman in Japan, huh?
more kind of actually, to be honest, it's probably in between.
Oh, okay.
There's the stereotype, which is for better or for worse true, that Japanese mix up their R and L's.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
The reason for that is the actual Japanese sound is la. It's
yeah.
between those two sounds, so they just can't go to one or the other.
Oh, okay. I see what
Because
you mean. Yeah, yeah. Well,
there's
but this was a fascinating culture. DNA takes these people all the way back to Siberia, which means there was a group of people in Siberia with that particular Yoman DNA, and some of them moved south and wound up in Japan. Some of them moved east and wound up in the Americas, which means some of the American Indian tribes could very well be cousins to Japanese. But when I think about this culture, I'm just absolutely amazed. 16,500 years. That's a long, long time. They probably had boats. We know they had pottery, and the pottery wound up all the way from Japan to California and to South America. The pottery actually had some rice that was actually baked into the pottery, suggesting cultivation. And you just begin to wonder, there's not a lot of evidence of war or anything like that with them. And you wonder how a culture can exist for thousands upon thousands of years and stay relatively the same, as far as we know, the same kind of language, the same kind of cultural habits. And I just wonder if these people were somehow so much more intelligent than us, because I like can't prove this, of course, with archaeology, but I like to wonder if they had a better concept of the word enough. They had enough. That doesn't work, especially over here. I don't know what it's like in Japan right now, but over here in America, man, I mean, everybody's talking about we got to get going again. We got to have more, more. And why? Well, because we got to grow. Why? Well, because if you don't grow, you die. Do you really? Haven't we got can't we just kind of settle down and say enough? There have been people in American history, the Amish, for instance, who just said, "Wait a minute, we're going to stop right here. This is enough." And boy, that's a lesson we just have to learn today. If we don't, I just wonder if we're really in trouble. That's why probably insurrection is probably my favorite Star Trek movie of all of them. For one thing, I love the theme music. The music is just wonderful in that movie. But it was just this group of people who said enough, and so they just happened to settle on a planet where they can live for practically forever. But that's all right.
Just to say, sorry, answer your question, and I have a few things I'll bounce back and see how it works. But yeah, I guess Japanese houses are smaller, so they have less stuff, but they can get pretty cluttered. When you visit a Japanese house, the entrance is very nice. They'll take you into a dining area, which is very nice. You don't get a tour of the house because the rest of the
Yeah.
house is a disaster. But my wife and mother-in-law did their spring cleaning. My daughter's about to turn 12, so a lot of kid stuff just went. But some
Yeah.
of it, we got these monkey puppets, and both my daughter and I were like, "How could you?" And I had this Cookie Monster puppet. I was like, "That was my Cookie Monster." And actually, that I did the ones I really wanted. I did manage to save from the dumpster. I took a couple to
Oh, that's good.
I took a couple of her old toys to the school, so current little kids can play with them. Kept the Cookie Monster for myself, and gave my daughter monkey puppets, which are actually my monkey puppets. But yeah.
Well, what a contrast to where I live. I live in a very little town in South Carolina, on the west side of South Carolina, right on what used to be the Savannah River. Now it's a lake. But this has never been a really a rich place to live. I mean, it's poor, working class. During started cotton farming and everything else, and the houses are well, they were just going back 50. Sometimes you see old wrecks of houses 50, 100 years. But then all of a sudden, people started coming in, and now with the dammed up lakes, we have a new housing developments have started to go in where they build 50, 60 houses at a time. And all of a sudden, all over the landscape are springing up these storage units, these metal storage sheds. Turns out that our houses aren't big enough to store all of our stuff. We got to rent a shed to store more stuff. And boy, that's a terrible thing. It really is. It drives me crazy sometimes.
And George Carlin spelled all that out for us with a place for
Oh,
my stuff.
yes.
Fantastic
Yeah.
little bit there.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I want to bounce back to a couple more points that you mentioned because I didn't want to interrupt too much. I do remember the Jomon about a year and a half ago during the Obon holiday, which is in
Yeah.
August.
Mm-hmm.
We went to we live in Nagano. It's the Central Mountains, and we went to
Mm-hmm.
a pretty high mountain citadel, and went to an obsidian museum where, like, 1,000+ years ago, they had been making these tools out of obsidian, which is hard to work
Wow.
with. They also
Wow.
used
Yeah.
some of the Mexican cultures, of course, and
Yeah.
they would let you, they had a workshop where you could make the obsidian, so they made little pennants and things.
Mm-hmm.
And I I I think I had like that restless leg syndrome thing, so I actually didn't sit down and do that with them. I just started walking up mountains and seeing how far
Mm-hmm.
I could go while they're doing that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was kind of interesting to see all those crafts. So that's a technology that was pretty impressive, something a little ahead of what you would give
Sure.
primitive people.
Yeah.
And going north and south of Jomon too, I'm sure you're familiar with the Yonaguni.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's being the
Yeah.
underwater structure that
Right.
looks
Right.
sort of
Right. Right.
like
Absolutely.
temple. One that I find people aren't as familiar with is if we go to the northern island of Hokkaido, we have the Ainu.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. I had a company trip where we went to Hokkaido to that area, so it was kind of interesting to see that because I think Japan's starting to accept it a little more, but for years that one was kind of like, oh, just don't look over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Uh, the whole obsidian thing gets me too, because we find in archaeology that we find all kinds of obsidian that was worked by ancient Stone Age people. It was very, it could be made into very sharp arrowheads and spearheads and things like that. And it was prized in a lot of ways. But it just makes you wonder some of the other technologies that we would come up with for people in those days. They were highly advanced technologies, and you just wonder what kind of civilizations made these. What kind of civilizations used these? What have we lost? What have we forgotten? Um, And I think it's important to get picked. That's why I write so many books about ancient cultures. I had a good friend of mine once whose father died 2 months before he was born, and he never knew his father, of course, and he had to uh, kind of form his own mythology about who his father was. He would pick up, in things from what people said about dinner when people come to dinner, and they would talk about his father, and he'd hear stories and father's friends and father's relatives and that kind of thing. So he had this idea in his head of who his father was. But a number of years ago, his mother was going to move from the house where he was raised, and he went to help her. And he went up in the attic, and up in a trunk up in the attic, he found something he had never known was there. It was a group of old journals that his father had kept, where he could actually read his father's writings and read what kind of a man this was. Totally transformed his idea of who his father was. And as a result, he changed his whole idea about who he was. I wonder sometimes if we're kind of like that. We've forgotten these ancient civilizations, these old people who just knew, they had a lot of wisdom, and somehow we've forgotten that. It hasn't percolated through. And if we can discover that again, we might remember who we are. Because I think if I've ever seen a lost generation, a lost civilization before, it's especially in the West, over here in Europe and in America. I'm not as familiar where you are, but I see people who are just kind of wandering around in a fog because they just don't know who they are. They've forgotten. That's why I think these stories are so important.
I spend that's a weird thing I would say. I spent most of my life walking around in a fog and so forth,
Yeah,
with just my ear open enough to, well, be having been pushed in this direction. So
sure,
now that
sure.
I do think about these things more, I'm like, okay, I don't have any major regrets here. I knew to listen enough because, yeah, the thing actually not far from you, I remember when I was about 24, I think I'd already spent 1 year in Japan getting offered a
Hmm.
job at a junior high school, not far from your area. And I was like, I felt like I was about to go to prison. So I just
Mm,
didn't take the job. I was like, I don't know. That doesn't seem
yeah.
what I want to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Being a public school teacher myself for quite some time, I know what that's like. September came. First time I faced a September when I didn't have to go back to school, I felt like I was freed from of something, that a burden that I didn't even know I was carrying. I know what you mean. Yeah.
My current job, it's would I like to be able to follow my own pursuits during the workday? Sure. But I'm pretty much, I got latitude to, I don't have like this heavy curriculum I have to do.
Hmm.
We have general lessons, but there's a lot of flexibility, and there is more respect for teachers in Japan. I have kids that'll go completely nuts, of course, but in general, I think we garner a little more respect here than than I know myself and my classmates gave our teachers, at least.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's something else that's going on here. It's funny. Most schools here in the United States have been closed for this last year because of the COVID, and the kids are starting to go back now, and a lot of them are saying they don't want to. It's amazing to me.
Yeah,
There's
the
a
psychological impact is
Oh
wild.
yeah, yeah. The kids have been free to kind of go at their own pace and learn in their own way, and the parents have been helping them, and a lot of them are just really looking at it and saying maybe this isn't the best way to do it.
Yeah, I feel like if I could, take my current consciousness and blast it into my school age self, I'd just be a complete rebel by going to the library and reading, and then they'd kick me
Yeah,
out of the library, just go back.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
got F's and
yeah.
everything. Yeah, but I learned so much.
Oh boy, I'll tell you, there are times when I look back and I say I'd love to do it again, but only if I could do it knowing what I know now, because it's quite a bit different. When and you just get wrapped up in it. You don't realize you're wrapped up in it. All my life, when I started I've been a Christian minister for 40 years, and when I first went to seminary back in the very early 70s, I had the idea that I wanted to grow spiritually. I wanted to learn. And I had the idea that I was going to be, if I went into the ministry and I became a pastor of a church, I'd be surrounding myself with a community who was just interested in learning more about spirituality and growing in that regard. And most of us did when we went to seminary. We came out and we found that it wasn't that way at all. It was just like another job. Churches are just kind of like small businesses. You have to raise money. You have to have committee meetings. You have to have trustee meetings. You have to have building and grounds committees, and you have to have the next plan for the next church service, and plan for the next this, and plan for the next that. Pretty soon 40 years go by and you realize, where has my life gone? So man, when it came time for me to retire, there was no question. I was going to go someplace. My wife and I came back here and lived in the woods in South Carolina. This was going to be a 1-year retreat. We just wanted to experience the spirituality that we have been trying to talk about for 40 years. We wanted to experience it rather than talk about it. We wanted to get it. And we came out here just to spend a year and kind of go on retreat and meditate. And I taught world religions, comparative religions, so I had a lot of background in that. And we came out just to try to put all this stuff into practice. 1 year it was going to be, and that was 12 years ago. We're still here. So
Oh, that sounds about the same as my
goes
Japan
on.
trip. It's going to be 1 year. Right, is that?
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
weird personality quirks just seem to fit in Japanese society. And okay, here's the thing. The thing. I mean, anywhere you live, there's going to be issues. Society's going to give you pressures.
Hmm.
As a foreigner living in Japan, they kind of assume I don't know. They don't always hold you to those unwritten rules. I mean, I'm trying to be a nice person to
Sure.
everyone, of course, but
Yeah.
again, I
Yeah.
get a little more latitude. It's like,
Oh, that's kind of nice.
assume you don't know.
How did you find adjusting to that? Was it difficult?
No, that's what I'm saying. I like, obviously the language gap is a thing, but otherwise I took to it like water. Just take for it going in a store in America, may I help you? May I help you?
Hmm.
A Japanese store, they may shout welcome at you and shock you when you walk in the door, but
Yeah.
otherwise you're going to have to ask for help. No one's going to bother you.
Yeah. 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 Well, it would be totally different. Uh, and over here, there's a sameness that I've found. I've done a couple of cross country bicycle trips from California, from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. And back when I was first starting, there was every town was unique, the little towns and places to eat and everything else. But now it's all changed. The motels are all changed. The restaurants are all changed. There's none of those little mom and pop things anymore. And there's a sameness where you could go into a mall someplace and not even know where you are. It's just amazing to me.
I think a lot of, especially Japanese suburban areas, they're much denser, of course.
Hmm.
You can walk around them really,
Yeah.
if you're into walking. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's like there is a sameness to that. But here's a weird thing: the towns, there are a lot of ma and pa stores and small
Hmm.
villages that have no change in them at all. They're kind of a sameness too, though, because Japanese society is somewhat monolithic. So
Hmm.
I can go to one small village and they go to a small village 500 kilometers away, and there is a sameness to them, but it's not a corporate sameness, it's a cultural
Hmm.
sameness.
That's quite a bit different. Over here, we're really losing that in a lot of ways. Uh, there is no, we talk about Southern cuisine and New England cuisine and Western cuisine. We don't have that really anymore. You can find it if you want to go looking for it, I suppose, but it's really too bad because, well, I guess that's one of the other things that drove me to be writing books. After having seen this stuff and then gone away from it, I have kind of an outside perspective, especially when it comes time to look at the ancient civilizations and the ancient gods and the supernatural traditions that I write about, and also gives you a time to slow down and practice, which is what quantum akashic field is all about. um, I had never been a believer, for instance, in out of body experiences or anything like that. And then now, lo and behold, I was having them on a fairly regular basis, enough to want to write a book about it. I was glad that you sent me your own journals too. I got a really kick out of a lot of that resonated with me. I think we probably have a lot in common in a lot of those things.
Actually, I got one for you this morning because I tell you, I wake up at 5. I go back to sleep, but I wake up at
Hmm.
5, and then I had a dream about this podcast. I was at my home or office, and we all needed to go somewhere, and I felt like I needed to stay, but we went, took a car trip, and then I realized, oh, I have to do this podcast. I need to get back, and and then no, we're already here. You need to be here, and finally I kind of snuck off, but I realized that I didn't actually have enough time to get back
Yeah.
in time. Now that's there's no deep spiritual meaning in there. That's just me, like, any early morning call. I mean, 8:30 is
Yeah.
not that early, but still, like, oh, what if I accidentally sleep in? That's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's a Rudolf Steiner who said, if you can tie in what is in your dream directly to your life, then it doesn't mean anything except that. Look for the things you can't tie in with other things in
Yeah,
your.
exactly. Yeah, and I think with practice, you learn to tell the difference. Really, I've found that there are certain little clues that come when I can tell when I was just having a regular dream or not, and then or when I was having an actual out of body experience. And I'm certain that many. People are watching or listening to the podcast now have probably had these kind of experiences in their dreams without realizing it, and yet I think there are clues we can look at, because this world is just a much bigger reality than we can see with our five senses. And sometimes, which that's what an out of body experience is, you're able to step outside those five five senses, the perception fence that we build around ourselves. And when that happens, I think we begin to see reality. We like to say that reality is what's inside our perception fence. No, I think the reality is out there. It's the one on the outside.
Just I'm just tying back in this episode a little bit, which is actually how I was going to start this conversation. But I did like the beatific vision of the sick bay from Goleko,
Yes.
the father. That was very
Yes.
Book of Enoch, very, I was thinking more of an ND in that case, but
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, it was. I just can't imagine what it would be like. There's another a two-part episode I think called Time's Arrow, which is a next generation one, where Mark Twain winds up in the future, and the captain is stays back in the past, and Mark Twain is shown around the ship, and he comes to understand that this is a whole different world than he's seen, and finally he goes back, of course. But it just I wonder what that experience would be like for all of us if we could just kind of wind up in the future. I wonder if we would be quite as sophisticated as we think we are in terms of the way we'd handle it.
I guess that's why I like that scene. I'm like, that's probably. I thought they did a very good job of showing his disorientation. With Mark
Hmm.
Twain, that's great. I love that episode, but it was kind of
Oh
played
yeah,
for fun. It was played for laughs, right? Where
yeah,
here it
yeah,
really
yeah.
was like,
That's right.
this. We know the Starship Enterprise because we've been watching the show for 3 years when it aired. But
Sure,
just
sure.
being able to show it that way was a pretty cool, and showing his confusion at the situation I thought was
Yeah,
very cool filmmaking
yeah.
too.
Yeah, and I think it's a very human thing to find, if we were to discover a culture that was much more advanced and they knew a lot, we would just naturally make the assumption that they know everything. It's a very human thing, and to discover that that's not the case, um, it, that was, I thought, a very poignant part of that whole episode.
I mean, Picard shows some steel by not going with the Ghostbusters
Hmm.
answers, which is if someone asks you
Yeah.
if you're a god, you say yes.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, I thought he explained it really well, and tying in archaeology. He said, "Have you had evidence of people before who didn't live in huts?" And she said, "Yes, in caves we can find evidence of their tools and things like that." So he began to show how the archaeology of the planet how, could show their evolution, and yet at the same time, here is this man talking from what would normally be considered such a superior, futuristic type thing. Um, it kind of brings uh, well, our whole understanding of who we are into focus, because we look at archaeology and we think that archaeology will show us where we have been and who we are. But there's more to archaeology than just stones and than artifacts like that. I like to talk about the evidence of lost civilizations exists not only in stone and the great megaliths around the world and the sites in Japan, like you mentioned, which are now underwater, but where obviously some people once walked 10, 12,000 years ago. Archaeology in stone, but there's also evidence, I think, of lost civilizations in story. And there, I think, is the richest field to mine. The mythology, the early religious ideas, and going back and discovering um, the stories of people that almost tell us too much. If myths are just teaching tools to teach us a moral lesson, why do we need all of that evidence? Why do we need all of that extraneous stuff unless the people were in contact with it? So uh, I I think that yeah, they're when we talk about the ancient gods, there's probably three possibilities of who they are. First of all, sure, they could be supernatural beings. This is the biblical idea, or what you find in the Quran, or in the Old and New Testaments, or Jewish scriptures. Yeah, they could be supernatural beings coming out of another dimension called heaven. A lot of Christians in my country, for instance, don't like to talk about supernatural beings, but then at Christmas time, they all sing about angels we have heard on high or something like that. You know, it's a story about supernatural dimensions, beings stepping out of another dimension. So, yeah, that could be one possibility. The other could be archetypal or mythology, that they're just a story that we make up to try to justify or to tell lessons about who we are. Or there could be survivors of a lost civilization who appeared, like in the Star Trek episode, to be gods because of superior technology. So we like to ask, well, what was that technology? We don't see wires, we don't see generators. Well, who knows that the technology has to be like ours? There could be possibilities of mental or spiritual ideas. I like to call a mental toolkit, or a psychic toolkit that perhaps could have been used. I had this pointed out to me once when I was in Egypt, and a group of us were going into one of the pyramids. And of course, in Egypt, you can't just go into a pyramid alone. You have to have an Egyptian guide who's certified and toes the line, the regular line of Egyptology that is currently in vogue. And so we were going in, there was a small group of us walking in behind this guide, and we were walking down this pyramid. And as we go down, the corridor seems to be getting darker and darker. We're getting farther and farther underneath the pyramid. And we're walking along this wooden path that they had built because they didn't want us scuffing around in any evidence that there might be there on the floor. And along the path where we're walking, there are all these electric wires. And the purpose of the wires was to turn the lights on ahead of us so that we wouldn't be in the dark. And once when we got in there, the guy said, I'm going to turn the lights off just to give you an idea of how dark it is. And he did. And you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. That's how dark it was. So I began to wonder, well, how did they see here to work before they had light bulbs, before they had electricity, before they had our modern technology? So I asked the guide, I said, I'm looking around at the roof, and I'm looking out there's no sign of soot. There's no sign of torches, none of that stuff. And I said to him, how is it that, they could see to work down here? The guide actually turned away from me and just kind of mumbled, oh, they must have had some kind of a light source. And
They
that's
show it
all
not.
he said.
It's rather
That's all he said.
they basically show it in some inscriptions, not in the pyramid, of course, but what is it,
Yeah.
Luxor or something? They have something that looks like a light source in some of the stone
Yeah,
carvings.
yeah, that's right. And it's just, but it's just amazing. But they don't want to admit that. They don't want to admit that there could be that kind of a technology. How could they have had a light source that we don't know anything about? We're the epitome of evolution, right? We're the highest civilization that ever lived, right? Well, I'm just not so sure.
That's the pitfalls of academia. Because if I've been
Oh,
teaching for
yes.
40 years, I've written my 7 books on an idea, and suddenly the evidence is there. I'm going to retire. I'm 2 weeks to retire, and suddenly, oh no, no, all that's wrong. It's not. You really don't want to change your mind on it at that point. Maybe
Yeah,
you should, but you don't want to.
it's hard. I taught comparative religion for years, and I would stand up and I would talk, for instance, about the religious traditions of India. And I would tell my students this and that. It was in the textbook, and I would deliver the lecture. And then the school said I had to give them tests, so I would give them grades on how well they could parrot my stuff back to me and everything else. You do that for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and then all of a sudden, something new happens, and you realize that everything you've been teaching has been wrong. And your students you've been forced to give grades to. What are you going to do? Call them all up and say, you remember that C I gave you? I probably should have given you an A because you were right. And then it's hard as a teacher to do that and to admit I was wrong. And a lot of teachers don't want to do that. And thus we have the academic dilemma that we have today.
I don't know if this is the worthwhile metaphor or not, but yesterday I walked into the school I teach in. It's I guess it's someone not that it's like a house size, but the rooms were all different. It's not a dream. They had simply
Yeah.
come in like when you look to the left, there's a big classroom. Now there's a small classroom.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
small TV room.
Oh.
Now it's a big room, and you go back to that, and there's a new classroom, and it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. The most fun thing is the one that was now a big classroom. That was a small classroom 4 years ago. Actually, was a big classroom. So I guess they decided to
Yeah.
fix
Yeah.
their mistake or something.
Yeah. Well, our whole system, especially over here in the West, at least, it's set up with the idea, with the basic underlying idea is that there is stuff that we now know, and this is now the truth, and this is the way it's going to be, and we assume it's going to be that way. I think there is a younger group of academics coming along in the science community, especially, and especially now that quantum physics is taking over so much. I think there's a younger group that is beginning to realize, wait a minute, we just can't do it this way. I know it's true in archaeology. In archaeology, there was, for instance, here in America, for 100 years, you had to teach Clovis first. The Clovis people were the first people to come to America 16,000 years ago. That was it. And if you didn't teach that, you didn't get a job, you didn't get tenure, you didn't get your money for projects or anything. Well, now that seems to be changing a little bit. And quite frankly, I chalk a lot of it up to television. There's good and bad stuff on television, but now I think some of these younger academics have found a way to take their stuff and walk and do an end run around the committees that had to check everything they did and approve of everything they did before they could publish. Now you can go over to a television and right or wrong, you can reach a big audience, which is all of a sudden going to start showing up at the schools and saying, wait a minute, I saw something on ancient aliens or the History Channel last night. Talk about it, in a way that's bad because we've lost that whole peer review process, which has some good things to it. But I think in a way it's wonderful. So maybe things are changing. I hope so.
It's funny. I've never watched Ancient Aliens, but
Really?
then I've been doing this podcast now with guests only for about 3 months, and somehow
Uh-huh.
I've already had 3 guests that like did Ancient Aliens. So I thought, have you done Ancient Aliens? Like, a little bit of
Yeah.
synchronicity there.
I get a kick out of it. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Andrew Collins at
Oh
all.
yeah.
Yeah. Andrew wrote to me a little more than a year ago, I guess. He was scheduled to lead a group into to Turkey and do a tour there to go see Göbekli Tepe and a lot of the ancient sites of Turkey. And he's kind of a persona non grata in Turkey right now, so they wouldn't let him back in the country. So he had the group all set. So he called me and asked me if I'd lead it. As it turns out, we couldn't go because of the COVID thing, and then we rescheduled it for September, and it's still not up. So now it's on for May. But at any rate, through that time, Andrew and I got writing back and forth. We very rarely on the same continent, so we don't see each other very much at all. But we do write and Zoom and Skype and all that kind of something. And so every time he's on Ancient Aliens, I get a kick out of it because I know what's going to happen on his Facebook post. He's going to get a whole lot of people saying, "Why do you waste your time on that show?" And then other people are going to call and they're going to say, "Oh, it's fantastic. I learned so much about this and that." Like everything else, we're just so divided about all this stuff. And like everything else, I think there's good and probably there's bad in it.
Well, books always, I think a book is the best way to get out that kind of information. But hey, if you put it on TV, so many more people are at least going to be
Yeah,
exposed to it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we expose people to so much, real crime stuff. I mean, true crime,
Yeah.
whatever. That's not good for your soul. So
I'm finding that out now. I can write a book and sell 20, 30,000 copies even maybe, or I can go and speak in front of an audience of a couple of hundred people or something like that. And then I can go on a I can go on a podcast or on a radio show, and all of a sudden there's 50,000 people listening, and I'm saying, whoa, more people than I've ever could imagine before. Here that I've retired, I've got a larger audience than I ever had in my life. And it's just amazing to me, this technology. I'm not sure where it's going to lead, but I'm amazed that you could get by without seeing Ancient Aliens even once. That's fantastic. You're probably the only one that I know.
well, I mean, one, I live in Japan, so don't see American TV, and I just the
Oh yeah,
only,
of course. I never
but
thought.
no,
Just yeah,
yeah, the only TV I see is when I'm downstairs and the news is on, and that's in
yeah.
Japanese, so I'm only half getting what they're saying anyway. And Japanese news is definitely less weird than American news, I
Oh,
think.
especially nowadays. Oh
Yeah,
man, nowadays the way to get news broadcasts out nowadays is it's all political, and our political situation over here is so divided between right and left that depending on what television show you're going to be watching, what television network you're going to be watching, you just get all one set of news or another set of news. And the old days when we used to sit down and listen to Walter Cronkite give us the news at night, those days are gone.
but yeah, I guess. But to say it, if I want to learn about an ancient civilization, a lost civilization, maybe even a few ancient alien ideas,
Hmm.
I really would. At least for me, I would prefer that in book form where everything is laid
Yeah,
out. You're listing
yeah,
the evidence because someone on TV just going aliens as I guess is
yeah,
the main.
yeah.
That's not really enough for me.
Yeah, yeah. The problem too is that once you get a TV show, you got to have something to fill it, and you may have some great ideas, but all of a sudden they're used up. Well, you've still got the time you got to fill. So what do you do now? So you keep getting more and more spectacular, and more out there, and more, away from it. It is tough. It really is tough.
Just a full circle, like you program who watches the Watchers and let people watch the Watchers.
Yeah, yeah.
Better than a lot of TV you'll see. The last time I was in America and occasionally put on TV, it was like I think I only watched the Travel Channel. So
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, my wife and I don't have regular television anymore. We just watch things like, we have YouTube channels, and I just love watching the specials that are out there. You can just find anything out there now. If I want to find out about a subject, um, my first tendency still is to go to a book because I'm kind of old fashioned and I like that. But on the other hand, I understand after having written so many books, man, I can write about something now, and then the editor won't finish it for 8 or 9 months. And then it's got to go into printing, and it might be 2 years before the book itself actually comes out. And it could be outdated by the time it hits the print. So I got a sneaking suspicion that the kind of learning we're going to be doing is going to be more and more live through TV and podcasts and shows and that kind of thing, because it's so much more current.
yeah, I guess all my screen time. Well, this is screen time. We're on Zoom, but is basically watching things I need to do for podcasts now,
Yeah.
which is that's fine though, because that means I'm always actively like I'm not watching in a trance. I'm always that's
Yeah.
if people are wondering, well, more like people who podcast with me. But the reason I make notes is that way I know I'm like actively watching.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially on the other one. Sometimes we don't even look at the notes, but just the fact that I
Yeah.
made them, I'm actively watching. I'm thinking
Right.
about it as it's going
Right.
on. So
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah. And I, I'm also a little bit worried because I see something in myself that I know is also going on out there. I've discovered that, especially since I've been watching in this last year, for instance, a lot more television, or, a lot more shows, or doing more work at the computer. My attention span is actually getting smaller. I can see it happening. I start reading a book, and all of a sudden I'll go through a page or two, and I won't even know what I read because I'll be thinking about something else. And if that's happening with me, it's got to be happening with other people, and that scares me a little bit. To tell you the honest truth, I wonder if we're seeing an evolution of the human race, especially here in the West. Probably not quite so much in the East, but I wonder if we're seeing an evolution of, you know, you go into homes and you just don't find books anymore. You find kids who don't read anymore. Everything comes to them from the screen. I noticed in a lot of my books, they almost all have to come out now with an audio book because that's what people want rather than having a book that they can hold in their hands. And yet I know for a fact that in audiobooks, it's just not the same experience. So I'm not sure where it's going. I really don't. And again, I'm worried. I hope we're not on our way to becoming a lost civilization.
Yeah. I mean, that's where, because I work full time. I'm, not retired or anything like that, but I've basically worked out where every step of my day is either work or something useful. So, like I said,
Mhm.
I take an extra walk. I listen to podcasts. Sometimes I realize I haven't been listening to the podcast for 30 minutes, which is probably the best time, but
Yeah.
I have a 50-minute train ride. So, that's when I read books.
Yeah,
50-minute train
sure.
ride back. I
Yeah.
read it. Lunch, I don't
Yeah.
eat lunch. I go to a temple and kind of do like a Zen meditation.
That's
All the
great. Yeah.
out of body. For me, it's more like lucid dreaming, but all that
Well,
stuff's the early morning stuff, right? So
yeah. Well, this is a very lot, similar stuff there. It really is. But it's just that, as Robert Monroe kept saying, the founder of the Monroe Institute, who gave us the term out of body experience, we are more than our bodies. And we live in a culture that just keeps on talking about the body all the time. And somewhere along the line, we've got to make some drastic changes in the way we're progressing. It may not happen in my lifetime, but I think it's going to have to.
I'll be wrapping up soon because we've been actually going
Oh,
over our time. But one thing I do want to mention, since you were asking about the Japanese culture, is I remember when I first started working here, one of my coworkers, now she's married to him, but he's samurai spirit, and you'll see sports
hmm,
teams, samurai spirit. It's not our bodies, it's us as a team in
yeah.
our samurai spirit. And Sunday nights I have a like a lemon sour drink, and my wife doesn't drink much, but she steals some. So she's like, through the sharing spirit, follow the sharing spirit. Because I always give a dirty look when I'm like stealing my drink. But yeah, the idea
uh,
that there are spirits that move you to do certain things, I guess, is something we don't think about so much in
mhm.
Western society, where it's
Yes.
almost a joke here because it's just supposed to be obvious.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I'd love to spend time in Japan. I really would. I could learn a lot, I think. I've practiced Zen Buddhism quite a bit, and just had a whole love of the culture. But it's a culture that I know about. It's not a
Mhm.
culture that I know, and there's a big difference.
Well, I should say what my practices are cobbled together. Some from wild books where the book sounded completely insane, but I got to the end. There were a couple meditation practices that, hey, this actually works really well, and
Yeah.
some of them are still included. So it's like I know the thing you're supposed to do is zazen, which is I can
Hmm.
actually do the lotus thing with your feet and not fall
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Zazen, though, you have to like sit on your knees and your heels basically, and I can only manage that for about 15 minutes.
I couldn't do that anymore. At 75 years old, I'm not able to do a lot of that stuff that I used to be able to do.
Yeah, that's why I made sure to teach it to myself while I was still reasonably flexible. But yeah,
That's a
the
good idea. Good idea.
sasen, that's the form of sitting, and it is wildly
Yeah.
uncomfortable, but especially the women in Japan can do it forever. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, it keeps you from falling asleep. That's for sure. My
Yes.
my tendency of meditation is, uh, I have to be careful when I meditate because I'm either so wired that I just can't bring myself down to a 1 point focus meditation that I need, or I get so out of it I just fall asleep, and either one of those is bad. I've got to find the middle ground so often.
I think I have found a middle ground recently because I have things that are based on breath counts. Basically, I am counting
Sure.
numbers, but and it's my lunch break, right? And there's a few
Hmm.
times where I've forgotten where I am, what time it is. I'm like, oh my god, have I missed a class? I've just been here for 2 hours. It's always
Yeah.
times out perfectly.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. That's
So,
good.
especially
With
yesterday, I actually I thought I was at home in the morning, and I'm like, oh, I'm at a temple.
yeah,
So,
with me, it's always some weird time. Usually, I hate to say it's about 3 o'clock in the morning. I've found that I was always waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was sufficiently rested where I didn't go fall back asleep again. But if I could get up and go to my meditation place and meditate, I wasn't wired yet to be thinking, what am I going to do today, and all this kind of stuff. And so I've had to find that consistent time. And although I don't practice as much as I should right now, and that's a problem I'm dealing with, I'm very much aware of the fact that still 3 o'clock in the morning comes. I feel like that's when I should be meditating.
yeah, mine's a little later, but I have the lazy version. I actually I didn't even realize this was a real thing for much until much later. So again, Akashic field information maybe, but I just lie on my right side, like this, and it turned out I was doing exactly the Southeast Asian sleeping Buddha position thing.
Oh, really? I
Yeah.
never thought about that. Yeah, yeah.
But I
I,
started doing it. It worked a few times, and after that, actually learned about Tibetan dream yoga and stuff. I'm like, oh, that's I was doing that without having even studied it. Crazy.
okay. Yeah. I hadn't considered that. I may be tempted to try that now.
Yeah, that's Tibetan dream yoga, and there's a position. Literally, you're supposed to lie on your right side. Your hands here. Your left
Uh-huh.
hand is just along your left leg,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and then you close your eyes and let the. For me, it's kind of a dull, colorful field, and ghost shadow images start to appear, and then
Hmm.
finally one of those images kind of and
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
I haven't had so much the I guess astral body thing, though I did once appear in a rice field about a kilometer from here, so that was cool.
Hmm.
That I think that was a proper OB, but usually I'm more on the lucid dreaming end of the
Sure.
scale.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's quite it's quite a thing. I very rarely, when I talk to people who have had out of body experiences or people who have had near death experiences, very rarely do I find people who want to come back. They're much more comfortable there, but they know they have to come back, so they
Yeah.
do. But it's quite a you know it, it, it's a discipline, obviously, that we have to get ourselves into, and yet, well, the old Zen thing. How do you work hard at it? You work hard at it by not working. All that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then of course, you have a wonderful time and you become enlightened. You still got to do the dishes and take out the garbage. So
Exactly.
on you go.
But I have found when I have when I have the more profound experiences, and sometimes I might get two in a week, but I feel like, oh, I have just used some kind of energy that, and it's going to be a while before I can like build up enough to
Yeah,
do that again. I guess that's why maybe monks have such ascetic practices, because they're
yeah,
keeping that
yeah.
energy, whereas I'd like to live my life, so if I can do both, that's a little bit of both, that's good.
Well,
um
well, there is a good there's a good Buddhist saying that said, if you can't reach enlightenment where you are, you can't reach enlightenment.
right.
Every religious tradition has traditions of people going up mountaintops or going out in the desert or going deep into the woods, and it's great to do that. But you still got to come back. You just can't stay out there all the time, because it's not an authentic experience, I don't think.
One interesting thing, I think it's I might be saying the name wrong, but Jiddu Krishnamurti, who I read a
Hmm.
few of his books, and
Hmm.
he sounds too stern. He doesn't sound like a fun guy, but he's almost always right. And I remember I was complaining about that to my friend, and he was like, "Oh yeah, his voice is so haughty." I'm like, oh, I've never actually heard him speak. But one
Yeah,
thing he said that I still find interesting is, if you're living your life well, you don't dream.
really.
I'm not quite
I'm
sure what he
I
meant by
haven't
that.
heard that. I haven't heard that. I must not be living my life well, because man, my dreams are just unbelievable in the last couple of years,
Well, I've been
all
looking.
the time.
I've been trying to read between the lines. Does he mean you don't like dream the other sense of the word, like you don't have these wild hopes, or does he mean that you are so active it's not a dream anymore? Because
I
at
don't
first
know.
it's just like, yeah, that just sounds sharp and horrible. But I started thinking about it more. I was like, there's actually two other things that are more subtle, but he could have meant here. So
Yeah,
there
no,
is own, I guess.
you got me on that one.
Yeah. Anyway, now I'll give you 3 o'clock morning existential drama
Okay.
about that one then.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea.
But Jim, I actually do need to wrap it up because I am going to make that walk through the rice field, head to work, get a
Well,
medication in the middle
good,
of the
good,
day. I'm going to
good.
walk the walk that I was talking. So
Sure. Great. To anybody who's listening, we talk back and forth and we can see each other on the screen, but it's nice to know who's out there. So I always like to give an invitation. If anybody wants to go to my website at www.jimwillis.net, there is a contact page. Please call me, tell me where you're from, or write to me and tell me where you're from. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to have your feedback because it can be a dialogue then rather than just between the two of us, but between this family that's really around the world.
and I always like to ask writers if you can get the books directly from your site because I got yours from
Yes.
Amazon a few years ago, but it's nicer to get from the authors if you can.
Well, yeah, well, you can get it directly on on my site. Once again, it's jimwillis.net, and there's a book page, and it shows all the books and that I've written, and it shows a lot of the reviews, and you can just click on it. It'll take you right to Amazon or right to the place, and get them right from the site itself. It's really easy.
And having read a few, I would definitely tell people to go check a few out. And yeah,
Thank you,
Ancient
Matt.
Gods is
Appreciate
very
it.
pertinent to today's episode, as you originally mentioned. So that's a good one to go to. And I just finished the Quantum Akashic Field, and yeah, definitely was
Oh,
was
thank you.
enjoying
Yeah,
that
my
read.
my
So
new one, just came out. My latest just came out a month ago, April 1st. It came out, and it's about the books that didn't make the final cut when the Bible was put together. Censoring God, it's called, and I think people will probably like it.
as for this podcast, we're Oral Hygiene Pod at Twitter or Facebook. We do a few podcasts. We do sci-fi. I think it's all under the umbrella of Podcastium Podcastius. Patreon. My British podding coworker and podding mate came up with that one. But yeah, basically the what you get now is you help us out and I post these episodes as soon as I can there. And Jim, this one I actually probably won't take too long. I think I'll be posting this one in about a week and a half. So
Real
you
good,
won't have
real
to
good.
wait that long. And yeah, of course the door is open for another one. I just, I base it on some kind of film, but as you saw today, it goes wherever it wants to go.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's been great talking to you.
Okay. I'll catch you later then.
Okay.
Thanks again. Bye bye.
Bye now.